So that reminds me, whenever I hear about my background, I go to visit universities and students ask me for some career advice. And I always say, what you do when you're at school is such an important way to prepare for your career. And I spent my time in university running, going to parties, and oversleeping, which was perfect preparation for Nike, Coors Brewing, and then Starwood Hotel. So anyway, it's great to be with you today. I want to start off by telling a brief story, and it relates to the travel and tourism industry, and then talk about disruption as part of that. So a number of years ago, I was visiting a country, and I was speaking with the government about travel and tourism, our fantastic industry, and how important it can be as a medium and a way of growing economic development. And you've all heard the statistics, 12% of global employment, 10% of GDP, and the importance of everything from managing accommodations to airlift to sites, doing the right kind of marketing, all the things that we talk about a lot when we want to promote our industry. And on this particular morning, I first met with some hotel investors who were looking at putting millions of euros to work. Then I met with the Minister of Tourism, and then I met with the Prime Minister. And the interesting thing about this country was it hadn't enjoyed this global boom in travel that we'd been seeing in so many other parts of the world. And that despite the fact that it had thousands of years of history, 300 sunny days a year, great cuisine, and proximity to the European Union. The issue that they thought they were dealing with was image. And they might have been right, but there was a bigger issue. And that bigger issue was the fact that I'm talking about 2011 in January, and the country I was in was Syria. And of course, we all know the horrific things that have happened since then. And I think it serves as an important reminder to us that even if we're very close to a situation, it's quite easy to get blindsided, quite easy to have change sneak up on us. And the fact that I didn't know that as a non-expert about Syria is one thing, but neither did the government or the investors who were so close to what was going on there. And it reminds me of how this can affect us in many other more profound ways. So in the hotel business, of course, we woke up one day to find that Booking.com, a mere website, was worth more than Hilton, Starwood, and Marriott put together. And then there was this millennial couch surfing company. I don't know if you've heard of it, Airbnb. Right? So I was recently at their headquarters in San Francisco, and one of their founders told me that they had a night where they had 3.5 million guests staying in one of their listings. Now, just by way of comparison, at Starwood, when I was there, we had 350,000 rooms. So we were 1/10 their size, had we even filled every room on a given night at Starwood. So change can sneak up on us in many different ways, which is basically how I get to my definition of disruption, which is this. You wake up one day and you realize you're in big trouble. And either you didn't see that change coming, or you saw the change coming and you didn't do enough about it. Which kind of gets me to what I see to be the new definition of insanity, and that is doing the same thing and expecting the same result. The biggest mistake we can make is continue doing what we've always been doing. Now, at a fundamental level, we all know this. The driver behind this is digital technology. And why is that? Well, anything that improves by a billionfold would dramatically change the landscape where we are. If farming improved by a billionfold, we could feed the entire world from a farm the size of Al Marjan Island. Imagine the disruption that would bring. The other is, let's face it, the ability to share, use, and manipulate information affects every human activity and can make it better. You know, from cryptocurrencies to dating to ordering groceries to launching satellites, it's ubiquitous, which is why disruption is coming to so many different places. And then finally, there's the network effect, right? So it used to be to create a network, to build, let's say, 1,200 hotels like we had at Starwood, takes decades. Now networks are all about preemptive first movers and two-sided networks connecting buyers and sellers around the world. And I'll give you an example of this. So I launched my book the beginning of last year. I self-published because I was writing about disruption, and it seemed somehow intellectually dishonest to go to an old guard publisher to do that. And I had the good fortune, I was asked by Jim Cramer on Mad Money to go on a show. Now, maybe some of you have seen this show. He's a nutty guy. He's like that even in person. In any case, I was thrilled. He's a friend of mine, and because he has 200,000 viewers on his show typically on a given day. So as an author without a publisher, that was great news for me. At the same time, I launched my book on LinkedIn, and I had over 100,000 views just through my own network. So I've been called many things in life, but I've yet to be called a media company. I think the point is that barriers to entry have changed dramatically in the last few years with the creation of digital networks. So there's an interesting paradox here because you would think all this better technology would help companies get better at what they do. And it sometimes does, but the paradox is the half-life of any public listed company today is about 10 years. So companies today that are on the stock exchange, half of those will be gone within a decade. That used to be 25 years. So why is it that large organizations struggle so much with disruptive forces? And I think there's a few things at work. The first is plain old self-interest, right? If you have a very profitable business, the last thing you want to do is disrupt yourself, cannibalize a business that's doing so well. Jonathan was talking about short-termism earlier. It's very hard to tell your investors, hey, I have this really profitable business, but don't worry, I'm going to completely disrupt it, right? If you're American Express and you charge 3% for every transaction, probably the last thing you want is some new payment platform that processes payments at, what, 100th the cost? So self-interest is one important barrier that we all struggle with within our own organizations. And that's a powerful thing, but I think even more powerful is what I call change-blindness. And I'll take you back a few years for this, because when I was in university, my professors told me to think of companies and individuals as information-seeking, utility-maximizing, rational decision makers. Now, that's not even fun to say, but I have a question. Has anybody ever met someone like that? Right? It took behavioral economists to come along and point out something that magicians and marketers and sales managers have always known, which is people aren't just irrational, they're predictably irrational, right? So, I mean, otherwise, why would people buy $4,000 handbags or run marathons or smoke cigarettes, right? We're an irrational species. And what does that mean? It means when we believe something, we look for other people like us and see what they believe. We choose what we believe based on what our peers believe. Another thing is we seek confirmation in information around us. When we believe something, we look for information like that. You guys heard of the show Fox and Friends in the US? There's a reason why they call it Fox and Friends, not Fox and Facts. Okay? For those of you who live in the US, that's kind of funny, but anyway. I'll just warn you when I'm going to make a joke from now on, okay? But you know, there's another one. Did you know that 80% of Frenchmen believe they're above average drivers? They'll tell you too. But the other thing that's interesting about this, I always feel sorry for the 20% who don't think that. But anyway, I can tell you change blindness is a very real phenomenon because we tend to overestimate our ability to understand what's going in the world and to make projections. So briefly speaking, when I was at Starwood, we had a $25 billion system. We had a $100 million media budget, which is tiny. So we were above doing things that were more or less PR stunts, right, Chandon? For example, we were launching the link at Sheraton, and the Sheraton really needed to be revitalized. So we were creating a cyber cafe in those hotels in the lobbies, and we were going to promote that and promote the fact and the reality that we all work remotely and sit in. It's nice to be able to sit in the link and do something on your iPhone or talk to somebody, whatever it is. And so what we thought we would do is we would ring the bell on Wall Street, but we would do it from Central Park. Sort of a play on this working remotely thing. And so we had a bunch of journalists lined up. We were going to do this event. There was only one little problem. It was September 15th, 2008. Does everybody remember that day? The name Lehman Brothers ring a bell? Okay, so the world is going into a death spiral, and we're doing this PR event, and we have all these journalists coming in, and they're coming to me, and good thing is, I've been media trained, so I know when I get asked a question that's off topic, I bridge them back to my core message. So they say, hey, Fritz, what do you think about the fact that the world is going to hell in a handbasket and the world financial system is melting down? I said, oh, yeah, you can, that can happen, but you could be working at the Lincoln Sheraton at the same time. So, but there's a serious message to this, right? We tend to focus very much on what we're doing, what we do well, and we keep wanting to keep doing it, and we lose sight of what's happening around us. Which gets me to the third challenge that big companies have, and that is that there are so many systems in place that we're focused on that we have a hard time steering an organization. It's like an aircraft carrier, literally, right? So making new processes, new KPIs, promoting different kinds of people, finding a different way of talking to each other. These are all very hard things for large organizations to do. I mean, think about it. Walmart's, they know a little bit about buying goods and distributing them and tracking data, and yet they haven't been able to compete effectively against Amazon. So these are some of the reasons why incumbent companies struggle so much with what's going on. The flip side is disruptors are invented for today and today's economics and today's technology, right? So disruptors can disintermediate us by creating these two-sided networks. Anybody here heard of Booking.com? Now, I have a confession to make. I didn't love Booking.com when I was at Starwood because they basically took 15 or 18% of a booking for what exactly? Anyway, great business to be in. Disintermediation is very real, and it was a challenge for us to compete against them. But there's another kind of disruptor that comes in, and that is one that's using software to automate a set of activities that are very focused on one thing and unbundling the services that you offer. So if you're a hotel company and you've got a state-of-the-art revenue management system, which is one of the bundle of things you want to sell to owners, but now they can buy that a la carte from somewhere else, or someone to help them do keyless check-in, or help them automate their front desk. Whatever it is, there's someone now that has piece parts of your business that they can offer, which is another source of disruption. In a way, from my view, TripAdvisor was a bit of both. They were disintermediators because they sent people to Booking.com, but they were also disintegrators, unbundlers, because they were basically taking away the signaling value of brands. You see, because it used to be, if you were going to go to Hyderabad for the first time, you'd say, well, I'll stay at the Westin because I know Westins are nice hotels. Now you can go online and figure out exactly which hotel is nice. It could be an independent. It could be one closer to where you're going to be. The signaling value of brands, the thing owners were paying us for, was less valuable than it was before. So the final way that disruptors make life very difficult for incumbent companies is they can operate with a very different economic structure as it comes to assets. And the two examples of that, to my mind, are one, Uber, where people can monetize their time, their free time in their cars. So a taxi company has to pay for when a taxi driver isn't driving, potentially, but they certainly have to pay for that car. And the same thing, obviously, with Airbnb, right? So basically monetizing beds that are not being utilized today. Again, a very hard thing to compete with if you are a hotel company and you've got to invest and build a hotel and maintain it. So these are some of the reasons why disruption today is such a powerful force. And there's one other thing I want to add to that briefly, and that is there's really two kinds of change that we are constantly dealing with. There are things that I call trend lines, which are going to go on for a very long time. We talked about the improvement of digital technology as being one of those. Another one that I think is maybe the example of a trend line is plate tectonics. So we're on a plate here that's moving about 2 centimeters per year. And it will keep doing that for a very, very long time. Those are trend lines. The tough part are these abrupt changes. It's the earthquake that comes when a plate moves 2 centimeters a year for a few millennia or a million years, and suddenly the world has to shake. That's what disruption is like. So you could have sat in 2000 and projected forward to what's happening in the world today, and you'd have been able to say roughly how strong that iPhone or that Android device is in your pocket. But what you wouldn't have been able to predict is the emergence of Facebook, the rise of Google, the growth of iTunes, and suddenly it's being eclipsed by Spotify. These are all disruptive changes. They're more like the earthquakes than they are than the plate tectonics. And when we're looking at businesses, we have to think about both of those. So, recap, disruption is pervasive, driven by technology. Incumbent companies face tremendous challenges in dealing with that disruption, and disruptors along the way have other economic advantages. And frankly, even if we knew everything that was happening in terms of the trend lines, it would be very hard to see around the corner. In the words of one Frenchman, Napoleon Bonaparte, the role of the leader is to define reality and to give hope. So far I've been defining reality, and unless you're a disruptor, it's a pretty scary thing. So let me give you a little bit of hope. And I think really there are reasons to believe that large organizations can cope with disruption. They can win at the old game and think about playing the new game as well. And probably the best and most vivid examples of companies that do that well are the successful disruptors that have come on the scene in the last 15 years. So think about Amazon, which started as a book retailer, but then one day woke up and realized the game was changed and they could be a full-service retailer. And in North America, they were responsible for nearly 20% of all retail growth over the last year. Or take Apple, which was a struggling PC maker, and they realized what they needed to become was a consumer technology platform company. So there are ways to change how we work. I think one of the most interesting ones is Netflix, that went from, remember the DVDs you get in the mail, to becoming an online, full-line media company. So there are ways to recognize that the game has changed and make that transformation. I work with a company, Royal DSM in the Netherlands, which when I first served them as a McKinsey consultant 25 years ago, they were a former state-owned coal mining company that was going public and subjecting itself to the vagaries of global markets. Today, they're a global specialty materials and life sciences company. And when Fortune magazine put together the list of 50 companies changing the world, they came in at number 2, just ahead of that fruit company in Cupertino. So the point is that existing companies can make this transformation. I think maybe the most strong example is General Electric, which was and still is in many respects the poster child for an industrial revolution company, but they've made the transformation so that at least half of their revenue will come from software-based businesses. And I'm told now on every flight we take with GE engines, it's about a terabyte of information that's being sent back to GE so they can do predictive maintenance on those flights. So it is possible for companies to make the transformation, and I think it boils down to doing 2 things. One is going from being change blind to change aware. And the second is to make a transformation. So in my view, when I was trying not to be change blind at Starwood, what I was focusing on was looking at our disruptors and saying, the online travel agencies, the OTAs, are very good at teaching us some things. People like price transparency, and they love online reviews. Those were things we could change. At the same time, we controlled the experience on property. That was something that we could do to defend ourselves against them. And Airbnb taught us that people want a sense of place. That idea of consistency all around the world is an old idea. People don't want to fly 10 or 12 hours and stay in a hotel that feels like one that you could have stayed in just down the street. So we started to focus on sense of place with our properties. To make the transformation, we'd already moved from being a real estate company to a global branded company in the business of managing and franchising properties. And I felt that we had to make the further transition to becoming a digital platform to enable 250,000 associates to deliver better hospitality, make people feel special and recognized by using technology as part of that platform, so we had a stickiness with guests, so that we could talk to hotel owners and say, we can bring you people who will stay with us because of our platform. And over the process of doing this, I learned a few lessons that I'll boil down to 3 simple things to share with you today. The first is, start with purpose. Start with purpose, because by focusing on what your company is about, you'll start to think about what you can do to make what you do even better, to prevent other people from disrupting you. That's one. The second is to live at the crossroads, to put yourself in a position that you'll overcome change blindness by hearing people from other backgrounds, other perspectives, other functions tell you what they see. And the final part is to keep on learning, not just as individuals, I think that's very important, but to create a learning organization, to move from that industrial revolution model where companies were hierarchical, centralized, and rigid, to companies that are horizontal, networked, and agile. So those 3 lessons are what I want to talk about now for the next few minutes. So the first is, start with purpose. Now, so far I've been telling you that incumbent companies, large companies, don't like change and they don't do it very well. But there's an interesting fallacy here. That doesn't mean that people don't like change. All right? As consumers, we love change. Innovation sells, right? But the difference is we feel like we have control, because if I don't like your product, I won't buy it. I can do something else. The other thing is, there's a whole slice of humanity that will give their lives for change, and they're called revolutionaries. And they do that because they so believe in a purpose. They so believe in change that they want to make that change happen in the world. Now, I don't recommend that you get people to give their lives for the company. That was a joke, so look, joke signal. But I do recommend making sure that you share a sense of purpose with your organizations, right? Talk to people about what's happening in the world, what it means for our company, and what I need from you to make that change happen. And if you can't bring everybody in the room to help make those decisions, what you at least can do is get people's peers together and make sure that you have a sense of community. You can use new sources and ways of gathering information so that people feel like they're co-authors of the change you're trying to implement. Another aspect of starting with purpose is what I call less planning and more strategy. So a long time ago, I was the head of strategic planning at Nike, and we talked about strategic planning like it was one thing. But strategy and planning are two fundamentally separate things. Planning is about deciding where the future is going to be and building towards it. It's like if you want to build a bridge, you get an engineer and an architect, and they make this bridge, and the bridge looks pretty much like it did in the blueprint. The trouble with a company is, by the time you've gotten to the future, that blueprint is completely changed, and you built a bridge for something that doesn't exist anymore. You get blindly focused on KPIs, and you get change blind. So it's very important to spend more time talking about strategy. And strategy, to me, is about answering the question, what is our purpose? How do we make sure we're the best in the world at delivering that purpose? How do we make sure that no one gets between us and our consumers? No one disintermediates us. And which brings it, I think, down to a fundamental lesson with purpose, and that is the key here is not just to talk about your mission, but to figure out what's not happening right. Because in the simple words, things that don't make sense get disrupted. Pain points for your consumers give disruptors an entry point. And folks, you know what? In the hotel business, we create all kinds of pain points and therefore all kinds of opportunities for disruptors. So there's plenty to do here. All right, so that's starting with purpose. The second aspect of this I was talking about a minute ago is live at the crossroads. And there's a few different dimensions of this. One is geographic. So a number of years ago, I'm at Starwood. We're looking at the world, and one country is responsible for 35% of our growth around the world. Anybody guess which country it is? China. You guys are on top of this. All right. It was China. Now, we're sitting in a boardroom in Connecticut. Nobody's Chinese. Nobody speaks Chinese. And if I'm really honest, I think I was the only one in the room who actually even liked to go to China. Okay? And yet, we're opening more hotels than Hilton, Marriott, I've heard of them, and Hyatt combined, okay? I say that with all loving respect to my friends in the industry. But the point is, we were doing great in China in spite of the fact that we were doing nothing to help our team in China and headquarters. So I took a page out of Mao's book, you know, where he talks about moving everybody to the field. And I said, guess what, folks? We're all going to work in China for 6 weeks. And we moved our headquarters to Shanghai. And it was an interesting thing. This is about 2011. We saw people in China doing something we hadn't seen anywhere else. They were using their mobile devices to book rooms. How revolutionary. Now, the interesting thing was no one was doing that anywhere else yet, but we said, you know, we're going to help our team by making sure we can do that first. And so because we were focused on doing that for China, when it came to the rest of the world about a year later, we were ready. And you may have read a few years later, we moved our headquarters to Dubai, just up the road, for one simple reason. After New York, Dubai had more hotels for Starwood than any other city in the world. And yet I was working in a global hotel company where many of our leaders in the US were uncomfortable about going to the Middle East. I thought, great, I'll make you uncomfortable. We're going. Now, during that week, we did have an opportunity to meet His Highness Sheikh Mohammed at one point. And I mentioned to him the fact that they were number 2 after New York. And he didn't miss a beat. He said, when are we going to pass New York? Fortunately, I had my pen ready, so we did some hotel deals. But the point is, living at the crossroads can be geographic, but can also be across functions. So when I first got to Starwood, we worked like most companies did, and that is our marketing guys were black, they were smoking clove cigarettes, and they were doing cool print ads and maybe the occasional TV spot. You ever met people like that? All right. Our IT guys were doing some horrendous enterprise IT solution that was going to cost twice as much and do half as much, and no one liked them anyway. Sound familiar? And the guys in the field, Hassan, were basically running their hotels hoping headquarters would not bother them, okay? Now, fast forward a few years later, and we're creating keyless check-in. And keyless check-in is what? It's an idea that our marketing team came up with for driving innovation. We had to have our technology guys there. We took our best GMs from the field to do this, and we created a crossroads of functions and geographies all at once, and we started to do things like a little startup. Now, here's the thing. What do startups do? Startups, more than anything else, make mistakes. And I mean that in a good way. Big companies, think about Six Sigma, no mistakes, right? If you're KLM, you don't want to make mistakes to learn, right? you probably want to do those mistakes somewhere safe. So the key is to make sure that you can have places where you're making mistakes and learning things, and the places where you say, guys, we've got this worked out, and let's make it happen. And we use the vocabulary playing tennis and selling winter, right? So playing tennis, anybody here play tennis? Great, a few of you. I'm told that in the last 100 years, there's been one rule change in the game of tennis, and that is you can jump when you can serve, which doesn't affect me because I couldn't jump and serve at the same time anyway. But it's a Six Sigma sport. It's about not making mistakes and mastering the fundamentals. Selling winter comes from this poor guy who was in North Sweden, where they have a lot of winter, and he had to try to get people to go there. So what did he do? He started with this ice sculpture idea that came from China and Harbin. Trouble is, in China, you have 1.5 billion people, not much to do, and in Sweden, you have 8 million people and nice warm houses, so nobody really went. So then he created galleries. He sold a little bit of art, still didn't do very much. And then he came up with this crazy idea where he was going to put people in a hotel made out of ice, which I can tell you is a ridiculous idea, but it worked. So the whole idea is in your own organization, you've got to be able to talk to people about where we're playing tennis and where we're still selling winter. And where, once we figured something out, selling winter, we can go over here and start playing tennis with it. And that's really the fundamental thing. The challenge we have in existing organizations is we have to sell winter and play tennis at the same time. We have to disrupt ourselves and keep winning at the old game at the exact same time. There's a great line from an American baseball player that I think captures the idea, and that is, if you get to a fork in the road, take it. So I didn't have to signal that time, got it. But that's the whole point. We've got to do both at the same time. And then finally, keep on learning. So the real point here is, in a hierarchical organization, if you're going to do something with innovation, that idea is probably going to come from the center. When I got to the beer business, we were looking for innovation. We didn't have much. We created a blue liner to the can. We changed the direction of that business. When I was at Nike, we did something that most companies were doing at the time still, which is we'd have this product development group over here. They'd develop something, and then we'd heave it out to the rest of the market. It was center-led innovation. Right? Now, when I got to Nike in Europe, I became obsessed with this retailer, Zara. Because Zara was famous for getting their product to market in 30 days at scale, and even like 7 days just to test things. And so I wrangled a meeting down in La Coruña. There's not much other reason to go to La Coruña, I can tell you. But although they used to have a good soccer team, not so much anymore. The problem is that they were very good at knocking things off. And when I was touring their locations, I'm looking at the floor because it's like a little sort of memory of mine. I remember seeing some of our products from Nike were being knocked off right there. And the founder of Zara said something I think that was so interesting. He said, "We are not the arbiters of fashion. The consumer is. We see what people want. We see what's selling somewhere else. We give people, we're always testing. We're finding out what fashion is by having people tell us." Now, if you have a Tesla, I think they've taken it a step further. So I got a Tesla, and the Tesla, it's a beautiful car, but it does a few interesting things. So I live mostly in the United States. In the United States, people don't like to pay taxes, so the roads have holes in them everywhere. They're very proud of that. The funny thing is, your suspension starts to know where the road is bad, and it raises the car up after a while. And that was based on an upgrade that came after I bought the car. It's developing self-driving capabilities. It's syncing up with my agenda to tell me where to go in ways that it didn't do before. All of these things are improvements in the product that happened after I bought it. In other words, it's a negative cycle time, right? We went from center to the field to very close, what Zara is doing, to now basically consumer-driven innovation and learning. And setting up our organizations to do that is the real challenge. Personalization is the ultimate effect of that, right? The more we have companies that expect companies not only to know us, but know us what we're doing right now and know what we're going to want, the more that challenges on companies to restructure their way of thinking so that the center isn't telling people what to do. The center is creating an organization that enables it to learn and hopefully disrupt itself. So I have exactly 1 minute left. And what I want to do is recap and say, the reality is tough, right? Defining reality. There is hope if we think about these lessons. Start with purpose, live at the crossroads, keep on learning. The key is having leaders that are willing to make those changes and to try to influence their organizations and lead them in such a way to make that possible. All of this is by way of saying, we've got to make sure we avoid this new definition of insanity and doing the same thing and continuing to expect the same result. Continue to expect that sales growth and gain a market share. That's not going to happen if we're not thinking about the disruptive world that we live in. So I think I have time for maybe, Jonathan, 1 or 2 more questions, and then I'm going to introduce our first panel. So I'm also really good at just cold calling people if I want to. Any questions? All right. So I'm going to introduce our first panel, and we're going to have a series of speakers this afternoon. I'm going to be a bit of your host in walking through this. And our first set of speakers are going to be hosted by Eric Fulweiler. He is the head of VaynerMedia in London, which is a New York-based media company or media support company. They are themselves a disruptor to the advertising industry, which I think he will tell you a bit about. But he is also, I think, in the spirit of living at crossroads, going to take you through with a panel who come from the disruptive side of the world, who have the mindset of the disruptors that are changing and attacking and hopefully making better the many businesses that we all are involved with. So, Eric, I can't see you in the...
Over here.
Okay. Eric, if I may ask you to come on stage and introduce your illustrious panel. Here you go. Thank you, Eric. Take care.
Thank you.